I thought I had it all figured out. Life had its ups and downs, sure, but overall, I felt lucky. Sarah and I had been married for 6 years, and it felt like a solid marriage, a comfortable, steady, like a well-worn pair of shoes. I loved her in that easy way you love someone when you've been together for so long. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and I thought that was enough. Looking back, maybe I was too comfortable. I didn't notice the little things at first. The way she started coming home later than usual. The moments where she'd smile at something on her phone and quickly put it away when I walked into the room. I'd ask her about her day, and she'd give me the same Kim responses. Work was busy. Or, I'm just tired, Tom. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone gets tired, right? It was a typical Friday night when everything started unraveling. We were watching one of those cooking shows she loved, and Sarah seemed off, distracted, but I figured it was work stress again, so I didn't push it. I wish I had. I wish I had noticed the cracks before they grew too deep to fix. The nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. It started out small, like a pebble in my shoe, but over the next few weeks, that pebble grew into something I couldn't ignore. Sarah was spending more and more time out of the house. At first, it was just extra hours at work, but then there were weekend errands and nights out with friends I'd never met or heard of before. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband, the one who reads too much into things. I kept telling myself, Tom, you're overthinking it. Sarah's stressed. Just let it go. But it was harder to push those thoughts away when the evidence was staring me in the face. One night, I casually asked her about her plans for the weekend. She smiled, that same smile that had started feeling more like a mask than anything genuine, and told me she was going to spend the day with her friend, Laura. We hadn't seen Laura in years, but I nodded and let it slide. You always think you'll handle something like this better than you actually do. You imagine yourself being calm, collected, rational, but when it happens, when the truth hits you in the gut, all that goes out the window. I wasn't snooping, at least, that's what I tell myself. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Sarah had left her phone on the kitchen counter, and I picked it up, intending to move it out of the way. That's when the screen lit up. A text message from someone named M. Can't wait to see you again. Friday was amazing. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have put the phone down and walked away. But I couldn't. My fingers acted on their own, unlocking the phone with the passcode I knew all too well. What I found wasn't just one message. It was a string of texts, each one a knife to the heart. The photos, the words they exchanged, all of it painted a picture of a life I wasn't a part of. She'd been seeing him for months. I felt the world tilt beneath me. The ground no longer solid. I had to sit down, had to force air into my lungs. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through, after the promises we made, my mind raced, trying to piece it together. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was drowning. For the rest of that day, I tried to act normal. I don't know why. Maybe it was out of some desperate hope that I could wake up from this nightmare, that somehow I could rewind time and make it all go away. But every time I saw her, every time she smiled at me, I felt sick. I kept waiting for her to say something, to give me an opening to confront her. She never did. Instead, she kissed me on the cheek, told me she was heading out for the evening, another work thing, and just like that, she was gone. I stood in the living room, staring at the door long after it closed, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence in the house was deafening. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make sense of this unbearable weight crushing me, but all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by disbelief. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe that so badly, but the evidence was right there in front of me, undeniable and raw. I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, the anger set in. I felt it brewing in my chest, a storm that had been building for weeks, months even. How could she do this to me, to us? The thought of confronting her twisted my stomach in knots, but I couldn't let this slide any longer. She had betrayed me, destroyed everything we had built together, and now, I had to face it. I spent the whole day pacing the house, waiting for her to come home. My thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. What had I done wrong? What had changed? When Sarah finally walked through the door that evening, I could barely look at her. My fists clenched at my sides as she went about her usual routine, acting as if nothing was wrong, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. Who's him? I blurted out, the words hanging in the air like a threat. Her face went pale, and for a brief moment, I saw the truth in her eyes. before she tried to cover it up with a first smile. What do you mean, Tom? I grabbed her phone off the table and held it out to her. Yes, who is he? The color drained from her face as she realized I knew. She didn't even try to lie. She just stood there, staring at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she was searching for the right words. But there were no right words. Nothing could undo what had been done. She sat her down, her eyes filling with tears, and I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. I wanted her to explain. I wanted her to tell me why. But as she started talking, all I heard were excuses. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said, her voice shaking. It just did. I didn't mean to hurt you, Tom. Didn't mean to hurt me. How could she say that? Every word out of her mouth felt like a slap in the face. My mind couldn't process it. This was the woman I had loved, trusted, built a life with, and now she was telling me that our life wasn't enough. I couldn't listen anymore. I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I needed air, space, anything to get away from the suffocating reality of what she had done. The days that followed felt like a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. My thoughts were consumed with the betrayal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. I imagined their conversations, their time together, the secrets they shared that I was never a part of. I couldn't function. My mind kept looping through the same questions. Why? Was I not enough? Was it my fault? I was true from everyone, friends, family, work. I just didn't care anymore. What was the point? My marriage was over. Even if she was still physically there, I was living with a stranger. I tried to avoid her after that. When she was home, I'd find excuses to leave. The house felt like a prison, each room haunted by the echoes of what I thought was our life together. I couldn't sit on the couch where we used to laugh at movies or stand in the kitchen where we cooked dinner side by side without feeling the crushing weight of betrayal. Sarah, for her part, didn't push me. Maybe she knew I needed space, or maybe she was just too guilty to look me in the eye. Either way, the silence between us was deafening. I didn't know what to do with it. On some level, I wanted her to explain herself. I wanted to understand what had driven her into the arms of another man. But another part of me didn't want to hear it. I didn't want her to justify it, because no reason would ever make this okay. Nothing could ever fix the fact that she had shattered the trust we'd built over years. One evening, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at the bed. It was the same bed where we'd shared countless nights together. The same bed where, I now realized, she had probably thought of him. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't even stand to sleep in that room anymore. It was tainted by everything I didn't know about her. Eventually, the anger subsided, replaced by hollow numbness. I felt like a ghost, just going through the motions. I'd go to work, come home, sleep on the couch, and repeat. Sarah tried a few times to reach out, to talk, but I always shut her down. I couldn't hear her apologies. Her excusing meant nothing to me. But one night, after weeks of silence, she approached me cautiously, sitting across from me in the living room. Tom, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to talk. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to pretend that none of this had happened, but at the same time, I knew she was right. We couldn't keep living in this limbo forever. Something had to give. Why? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I found out. Why him? Why us? Sarah's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw real tears in her eyes. I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. It wasn't about you, Tom. It was never about you. That answer didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. Then what was it about? I demanded. How could you throw away everything we had? She looked down, wiping at her tears. I don't know how to explain it. It just happened. I felt disconnected from you, from us. I was lonely, and he was there. He made me feel seen. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always prided myself on being a good husband, on being there for her, and now she was telling me she had felt alone in our marriage. It didn't make sense. You should have talked to me, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. You should have told me how you were feeling instead of doing this. I know, she whispered. I know I should have, but I was scared that you'd think less of me, or that it was too late to fix things. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. So you thought the best solution was to go behind my back, to lie to me every day? She didn't answer, and in that silence, I realized there was nothing more to say. I couldn't fix this. She couldn't fix this. After that conversation, something in me shifted. Then numbness began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sadness. I mourned the loss of the life we had planned, the future that was now out of reach. Everywhere I went, it felt like people knew. At work, in the grocery store, even with friends, I felt like I was carrying around this invisible scarlet letter, and I hated it. The few friends I confided in told me I should leave her, that I deserved better, but it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this was simple. Sarah and I continued to live under the same roof, but we were more like roommates than husband and wife. We barely spoke unless it was necessary. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. She had once been the person I trusted most in the world, and now she was a stranger. The more time passed, the more I realized we were drifting further and further apart. And deep down, I knew we couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. One night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in my head. I thought about the day we got married, how happy I had been to start our life together. I thought about all the little moments that had defined our relationship, trips we'd taken, the lazy Sundays spent reading or watching movies. It was like watching a movie of my life, only now I knew the ending was nothing like I'd imagined. I got up and went to the bedroom, standing in the doorway for a long time. Sarah was asleep, curled up on her side, her face soft and peaceful in the moonlight. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt tired. I quietly closed the door and went back to the couch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that had settled over me. I needed to make a decision. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, holding on to a marriage that had already crumbled. The next morning, I told her. I sat her down at the kitchen table and said the words I never thought I'd say. We can't keep doing this. I think we need to separate. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. No, please, we can work through this. I'm sorry for everything. I am, but we can't fix this. I shook my head. I don't know if we can. Sarah, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? She started crying, pleading with me to give her another chance. But I had made up my mind. It wasn't an easy decision. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I knew it was the right one. The weeks after our separation were some of the hardest of my life. Sarah moved out of the house, and suddenly, the space that had once been filled with her presence felt unbearably empty. It was strange how quickly everything changed. The house, once a home, now felt like a shell. I tried to stay busy, throwing myself into work, spending more time with friends. But no matter what I did, there was always that gnawing feeling of loss. The routine we had shared, the life we had built, it was all gone. I didn't hear from Sarah much after she left. A few texts here and there, checking in on logistical things, but nothing more. It was like we had become two people who were once close but now existed in different worlds. And maybe that was true. I spent a lot of time thinking about what had happened, replaying everything in my mind. I tried to figure out where it all went wrong, if there had been signs I had missed, moments where I could have done something differently. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no clear answer. Maybe there never would be. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, and then there were days when the weight of everything came crashing down again. But I kept moving forward, even if it was just a step at a time. I started going to therapy, something I had never considered before. It was uncomfortable at first, talking to a stranger about my feelings, but over time, I began to see the value in it. The therapist helped me unpack my emotions, helped me understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, that I wasn't responsible for Sarah's choices. She also helped me see that healing wasn't a straight line. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and that was okay. I was learning how to live with the pain, how to move forward without being defined by it. One evening, months after the separation, I found myself standing on the beach. The ocean had always been my refuge, a place where I could clear my head. The waves rolled in and out, steady and constant, as if nothing in the world could disturb their rhythm. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the life we had shared and the future we had lost. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad either. I just accepted it. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. It was time to let go. I stood there for a long time, watching the waves, feeling the cool breeze on my face. And as the sun began to set, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized something. I was going to be okay. After that moment on the beach, something shifted in me. I wasn't fully healed, not by a long shot, but I felt lighter. There was a sense of closure that hadn't been there before. I started focusing on what came next, on rebuilding a life that was just mine. I began taking care of the house again, little by little. The first thing I did was change the bedroom. I couldn't keep sleeping in that room the way it was, with the memories of Sarah hovering like shadows in every corner. I repainted the walls, changed the bedding, moved the furniture around. It wasn't a drastic transformation, but it was enough to make it feel like my space, something new, something mine. I also started going out more. At first, it felt forced. I'd meet up with friends, or go to the gym, or take walks around the city, but it always felt like I was just trying to fill the silence. Eventually, though, it started to feel natural again. I began to enjoy being with people, started looking forward to those moments when I wasn't alone. It was during one of those outings that I ran into Jenny. We'd been friends in college, part of the same group that hung out at bars and threw house parties, but we hadn't seen each other in years. I was walking through the park, taking in the fresh air, when I heard someone call my name. "Tom, is that you?" I turned to see her standing there, a surprised smile on her face. She looked different from the way I remembered. Her hair was shorter, and she had that confident, self-assured presence that comes with age and experience. But she was still Jenny, with her warm smile and easy laugh. We talked for a while, catching up on the lost years. She'd moved away after college, spent some time traveling, but had recently returned to the city to start a new job. It was nice, talking to someone who knew me before all of this, someone who didn't see me as the guy whose wife cheated on him. Before we parted ways, she suggested we grab coffee sometime. I hesitated for a second, not sure if I was ready to reconnect with someone from my past, but then I found myself agreeing. Maybe it was time to open up again, even if just a little. That coffee turned into dinner, and before I knew it, Jenny and I were hanging out regularly. It wasn't romantic, at least not at first. It was just easy. She knew me, understood parts of my life that felt distant now. There were no awkward explanations or uncomfortable silences. She didn't ask about Sarah unless I brought it up, and even then, she listened without judgment. One evening, after we'd been talking for hours at a local bar, she looked at me with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. "Do you ever think you'll trust someone again, Tom?" Her question hit me harder than I expected. Trust, that was the thing I hadn't allowed myself to think about. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's hard to imagine trusting someone like that again." Jenny nodded, understanding without pushing me to elaborate. "I get it, but, trust isn't about being sure. It's about choosing to take the risk again, even when you know how badly it can hurt." Her words stayed with me long after I went home that night. Could I do that? Could I risk being hurt again? The thought of opening myself up to someone felt like stepping too close to the edge of a cliff. But part of me wondered if maybe Jenny was right. Maybe trust wasn't something that came naturally, it was something you chose, despite the fear. A few months passed, and during that time, my friendship with Jenny deepened. We laughed together, shared stories, even leaned on each other when life got tough. She wasn't pushing for more, but there was an undeniable connection between us, something that went beyond friendship. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront after dinner, I felt the familiar surge of hesitation. I wanted to reach for her hand, but fear held me back. The last time I'd let myself feel this close to someone, it had ended in disaster. But then I remembered what she'd said about trust. "Jenny," I began, stopping to face her. She looked up at me. "Waiting? I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to try. With you?" Her smile was soft, understanding. "You don't have to rush, Tom. I'm not going anywhere." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. And, slowly, I reached for her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the biggest step I'd taken in a long time. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt something close to hope. As the weeks turned into months, Jenny and I grew closer. We took things slow. There was no pressure, no rush to define what we were. It felt like a fresh start, like we were building something from the ground up. I still had moments of doubt, times when the past would creep up on me and I'd worry about getting hurt again. But Jenny was patient. She didn't push me to move faster than I was ready for. And in her quiet way, she showed me that it was okay to trust again, even if it wasn't easy. One night, after we'd spent the day together at the beach, I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else. I told her about Sarah, about the discovery, the anger, the pain. She listened, never interrupting, never offering platitudes. When I finished, she looked at me with those kind eyes of hers and said, "I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm glad you're here now." It was such a simple statement, but it meant more than she could know. I was here. I was still standing, still trying, still living, and maybe that was enough. I don't know if there's ever a moment where you can say, "I'm fully healed." The scars from Sarah's betrayal would always be a part of me, but they didn't define me anymore. They were just one chapter in my story, not the whole book. Jenny and I continued to grow together, and while I still had moments of fear and insecurity, I knew I wasn't alone. She was there, beside me, helping me rebuild, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a future that wasn't clouded by the past. One evening, as we Saturday together on the same beach, where I had first started to let go of the pain, I looked at Jenny and felt a sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was good, and that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange, I took a deep breath. The future was wide open, full of possibility, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it.